started when 5 masked men walked into the meeting and sat down. Who were they? Why were they there? They weren't violent, but they had an aura of violence. They muttered racist and anti-Semitic remarks under their breath as the meeting went on. One held a sign quietly in his lap. "De Goyim no," an anti-Semitic slur. It was obnoxious and intimidating, but they didn't do anything that would get them thrown out of the meeting. Next month, it was worse. The same meeting was about to take place. About 50 white nationalists gathered outside the community room at Virginia Park right here in Santa Monica. The usual dozen or so members of this Committee for Racial Justice were arriving for their regular monthly meeting. The crowd of intruders taunted them. "You just want to erase all white people," one shouted. As the committee began its discussion of racial justice issues, the intruders tried to push in through a side door. They were confronted by a line of police and a group of burly black men who had come as allies from Southeast LA. A shouting match developed at the door. Some of the white supremacists banged on the windows, shouting. A few managed to enter the room. A police officer addressed the committee. In light of the disruption, did they want to end the meeting? A show of hands bravely said no. It was against this backdrop that I and hundreds of people in our community decided to take a stand. Monitoring of internet chat showed that the disruptors planned to make a big splash at the committee's next meeting, and this was just last month. 300 white supremacists and 50 neo-Nazis are planned to descend on the park and intimidate this small group out of existence. Well, Charlottesville had just happened. A few organizers of that white supremacist rally were involved in organizing the planned action in Santa Monica. A young woman had been mowed down and killed in Charlottesville. There was no telling what these people might do. But the Committee for Racial Justice was not backing down. They put out a call for hundreds of people in the community to come fill the park. Committee members met with city officials and police. They had a training session in nonviolent resistance and de-escalation techniques. And they planned peaceful activities in the park before the meeting. A picnic, a bluegrass band, roving musicians, a potluck dinner. Well, all week I was worried. What if there was violence? What if someone brought a gun? Was I willing to risk my life, the lives of my husband and my 2 adult children who were planning to come with me? A neighbor told me, "I'm not the kind of person who goes to an event like this." Well, I didn't blame him, but I also thought, well, who is the kind of person? A Facebook post by a friend of mine resonated with me. Do you ever wonder what you would have done in Nazi Germany? What you are doing now is what you would have done. My Jewish mother had lived through World War II. Her family had escaped occupied Paris just a couple of weeks before Gestapo came to the door looking for them. What would she think of Nazis coming to Santa Monica? So many people during World War II, including my grandfather, had thought, just lay low and it will pass. But they turned out to be wrong. My grandmother had given my grandfather an ultimatum. I'm leaving with the children. You decide what you're going to do. And he left with them. Well, I live close to the park. So about 3 hours before the meeting on a Sunday afternoon, feeling pretty edgy, my daughter and I decided to walk around the park with our dog to see what was up. A cluster of police officers were chatting near the entrance. They'd put up metal barricades all around the community room. A group of 12 motorcycle cops rode by, circling the park. I peeked into the meeting room. A frail, white-haired woman sat alone in a folding chair. She said the committee organizers had gone out to eat, but she stayed behind in case any intruders decided to come in. Great, I thought. One little old lady is standing guard. When we returned an hour later, hundreds of supporters were milling around the community room. There were police officers around the building, behind the barricades, and then a really startling sight, horses. There were sheriffs on horseback dotted throughout the park. Wow, law enforcement had really turned out. Someone told me the entire Santa Monica Police Department was called in, even on their days off. And neighboring police forces, LA, Burbank, and Glendale, were staged nearby at Santa Monica College, just in case it really got rough. I saw a couple of intense-looking young people, all dressed in black with bandanas over their faces. I thought they look a little scary. Well, it turns out they were the Antifa. That's the group that is formed to fight white nationalists. But they've been violent too, such as in the clashes up in Berkeley. So I wasn't so sure if I was glad to see them or not. I heard one speaking to a community member, and he said, "We're only going to do peaceful resistance. If that doesn't work, we're turning it over to the police." So I felt somewhat reassured. There were also people with orange armbands. One of them told me they'd been trained in de-escalation. So if there was trouble, they would try to head it off and or turn it over to the police. So I was glad that the response did seem to be pretty well organized. Still, there was no telling what was going to happen. Even though the meeting was now 2 hours away, about 300 to 400 people lined up outside the community room. So remember, this is a group that usually has like 12 people at their meeting. So now they have like 300 or 400 people, and only the first 120 would get in. That was the capacity of the room. Suddenly, someone yelled, "They're here!" And they pointed to a corner of the park, 60 of them. Well, I braced for trouble, but then I didn't see anybody. The ambience was of kind of defiant gaiety. We were going to be peaceful and celebrate life no matter what the white nationalists had in mind. There was an Aztec group. They did a tribal dance, and one of their elders chanted peaceful blessings to the four winds. Then I was really on my guard looking around the crowd, and I saw a swarmy-looking guy with a tall, blonde pompadour. And he was videotaping. And then he quietly slithered away. And someone else in military camouflage with a camouflage hat taking some pictures, and he left. Well, I could just imagine the headlines tomorrow in some ultra white ring posts making fun of this whole gathering, because we'd been warned about this. They said, be careful how you behave, because these guys mainly want footage that they can show to make us look bad. So act accordingly. So finally the organizers started letting people into the meeting, and my daughter and I didn't get in. A couple hundred people left, other people were milling around, but I lingered there, and I wasn't sure why, but I didn't feel like the people inside were safe. Like, what if the intruders came later? I ran into several of my neighbors and a couple of old friends there. We chatted, and I'd keep glancing around to see if anyone dangerous was approaching. One friend pointed at our tennis shoes. "I wore these in case I have to run." I laughed, pointed at my flats. "Yeah, that's funny. I had the same thought. No open-toed shoes." At one point, 3 kind of sketchy-looking white guys approached the barricade, but they looked around as if they couldn't find what they were looking for, and they left. Then, suddenly, in another direction, there was shouting. About 15 guys on our side of the barricades pressed forward and hurled insults. I inched forward to see. On the other side, a scrawny young man with a red Trump baseball cap was shouting and pointing. I tensed. Would this escalate? The police and the horseback deputies moved into a formation. With military precision, a line of officers filled in the space between the 2 rows of barricades. Half of them faced one way, half faced the other. The sheriffs on horses stood guard on either side. And meanwhile, the ridiculous spectacle continued. One guy with a red baseball cap shouting at more than a dozen guys on the other side. Then I noticed he had a videographer with him. Well, the police escorted them away, and I realized, now, he has his footage. I guess that's what he wanted. So where were the hordes who'd been expected? I have a feeling they got one look at the hundreds of people from our community, the police, the mounted sheriff's deputies, the metal barricades, and had turned around and gone home. So we took a stand here, and it worked. We protected our park. We didn't let ourselves be intimidated by scary-looking guys with spooky signs and symbols, because our peaceful way of life is worth protecting.